It was just another December night, cold and quiet, the way you'd expect it to be so close to Christmas. I had picked up a seasonal delivery gig. Nothing fancy, just a way to earn some extra cash for the holidays. You know how it is. Bills pile up, gifts don't buy themselves, and the idea of driving around with Christmas music playing seemed peaceful, or so I thought. The job was simple. Load up the van with boxes wrapped in cheerful paper, check the addresses, and drop them off. I wasn't working for a big-name service, just a small local outfit that specialized in last-minute deliveries. I liked that, though. It felt more personal, like I was part of a chain that made someone's holiday a little brighter. That night, the air smelled of wood smoke, and the houses I passed were lit up with colorful decorations. Some had twinkling lights wrapped around every bush and tree, while others had those giant inflatable Santas that always made me chuckle. Felt cozy, like I was part of the holiday magic, even if I was just the guy delivering the gifts. My route started off easy enough. I dropped a box at a house with a glowing reindeer on the lawn, another at a place where kids were building a snowman. It was kind of fun, watching these small glimpses of other people's lives. Each delivery was a little piece of joy I got to leave behind. But as the night wore on, the streets became quieter. Fewer windows had lights on, and the cheer I'd felt earlier started to fade. Maybe it was the cold seeping into the van or the exhaustion from driving all day, but something felt off. Not bad exactly, just heavy, like the night had grown too still. Around 9 p.m., I pulled up to a house that wasn't on my list. At least, I didn't think it was. The address wasn't clear, no numbers on the mailbox, no visible street sign nearby, but the GPS marked it as my next stop. The house was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. No lights, no decorations, not even a wreath on the door. It stood out, especially compared to the bright, festive homes I'd been visiting all evening. I hesitated. Maybe it was a mistake, but then I saw the package label. It matched the location on the GPS, so I figured why not? Maybe they weren't the decorating type. Not everyone goes all out for Christmas. I grabbed the box, which was lighter than most, and walked up the creaky steps. The porch light flickered as I rang the bell. No answer. I knocked, waiting for what felt like forever, my breath clouding in the cold air. Still nothing. I thought about leaving the package by the door, but something made me pause. I don't know what it was. Maybe the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere inside or the way the porch boards groaned under my weight. Whatever it was, I suddenly felt exposed, like someone was watching me. "Hello," I called out, half hoping no one would answer. My voice sounded strange in the stillness, too loud and too small at the same time. I put the box down, took a step back, and nearly tripped over an old flower pot. That's when I saw it. A curtain in the front window, shifting ever so slightly. It wasn't the wind, I was sure of that. Someone was there, watching. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself to relax. It was probably just an old-timer too shy to come to the door. Still, the feeling lingered, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Back in the van, I locked the doors and tried to shake off the weird vibe. But as I drove away, I couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the shadows near the house. A figure, maybe, but when I blinked, it was gone. I laughed at myself, trying to shake off the unease. "Get a grip," I muttered. It was just a normal night, right? A quiet neighborhood, a lonely house, and a tired delivery guy letting his imagination run wild. That's all it was. Or so I told myself. The rest of my deliveries went smoothly, but the strange feeling from that one house stayed with me. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you panic. It was quieter, like a shadow that followed me, just out of sight. By the time I finished my route, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe the house was abandoned, and I was just tired. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The night wasn't over, though. After finishing my last delivery, I had to return to the warehouse to drop off the van and any undelivered packages. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the parking lot. Most of the other drivers had already gone home, but I noticed one van still parked by the loading dock, its headlights dim and the engine idling. As I got closer, I saw my coworker Mark leaning against the van. Mark wasn't the friendliest guy around. He mostly kept to himself, but he was dependable. We didn't talk much, just the occasional nod or grunt when we passed each other in the warehouse. Tonight, though, something about him seemed different. He didn't look up when I parked, just kept staring at the ground like he was deep in thought, or like he was trying not to look at me. "Hey, Mark," I said, grabbing the keys and stepping out of the van. "Late night, huh?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked at me, his face was pale, and his eyes darted around like he was checking to see if we were alone. "You shouldn't have gone to that house," he said, his voice low and unsteady. I froze. "What house?" "The one with no lights," he muttered. "The one that shouldn't be there." I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Come on, man. It's just a house. Creepy, sure. But you don't get it," he interrupted, his voice sharp now. "They don't like visitors." That's when I noticed his hands were shaking. He stuffed them into his jacket pockets like he was trying to hide it, but the damage was done. "Mark, are you okay?" I asked. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. Instead, he climbed into his van, slammed the door, and drove off without another word. I stood there for a minute, the cold biting through my jacket, replaying his words in my head. They don't like visitors. Who were they? Was he messing with me? Mark didn't seem like the prankster type, but there was something in his eyes. Fear, maybe? Whatever it was, it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to shake it off as I locked up the van and headed inside. The warehouse was almost empty, just a skeleton crew wrapping up for the night. The silence was comforting at first, a break from the endless holiday music I'd been hearing all evening. But as I walked through the aisles of packages, that strange feeling returned. It started small, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just rows of boxes stacked neatly on metal shelves. I laughed at myself, trying to break the tension. "Get a grip," I muttered, but my voice sounded hollow in the vast, empty space. As I reached the back of the warehouse, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like paper crinkling. I stopped, holding my breath, straining to hear. Came again, this time closer. I looked around, but the aisles were empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing faintly. No answer, just the hum of the overhead lights and the faint rustle, growing louder. I should have walked away. I should have turned in my paperwork and gone home. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, kept me rooted to the spot. I followed the sound to the farthest corner of the warehouse, where a stack of packages sat waiting to be sorted. One of the boxes was moving. It wasn't much, just a tiny shift, like something inside had bumped against the wall. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Packages didn't move on their own. Maybe it's a pet, I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. Someone's delivering a puppy or a cat. It happens, right? I reached out slowly, half expecting the box to lurch toward me. Didn't. I nudged it with my foot, and the movement stopped. "See? Nothing to worry about," I said aloud, my voice shaky. I bent down to check the label, but the writing was smudged, almost like it had been scratched out. That's when the lights flickered. Just for a second, the warehouse plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the box was gone. I jumped back, my head whipping around, but there was no sign of it anywhere. The stack of packages looked untouched, like nothing had ever been there. My breathing was shallow now, my chest tight. It's late, I told myself. You're tired. You're imagining things. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As I made my way to the front office, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every step felt heavier, like something or someone was following me. I glanced over my shoulder more times than I could count, but the aisles were always empty. When I finally reached the desk, the night manager, Sarah, looked up from her computer. "You okay?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I lied, handing over the keys. "Just long night." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment, like she could tell something was off. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's warning had been more than just the ramblings of a tired coworker. And when I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement in the shadows, I realized I wasn't ready to go home just yet. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what it was. I didn't go straight home that night. Couldn't. The quiet streets and my dimly lit apartment felt like too much to handle, especially with my thoughts racing. Instead, I stopped at an all-night diner, hoping a cup of coffee and the presence of other people would shake off the strange weight pressing on me. The place was mostly empty. Just a few truck drivers hunched over their meals and a waitress who looked like she'd been working since last Christmas. I slid into a booth near the window where I could keep an eye on the parking lot, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The coffee was hot but bitter, and the silence in the diner wasn't as comforting as I'd hoped. Every time the bell over the door jingled, I flinched, half expecting to see Mark or someone from that house walk in. But no one unusual came. It was just me and my restless thoughts. As I stared into my cup, trying to make sense of everything, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have gone there." My stomach dropped. For a moment, I thought it might be Mark, but he'd never had my number. I typed back quickly, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, like the person was typing, but then they vanished. No reply. I put my phone down, my hands trembling slightly. Maybe it was just a prank, I told myself. Someone messing with me. But the timing was too perfect or too awful. I paid for my coffee and headed back to my car, the cold air biting at my skin. The parking lot was empty except for my car and an old sedan parked a few rows away. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something strange. The sedan's engine wasn't running, and its windows were fogged up from the inside, like someone was sitting in it. I didn't wait to find out. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove off, keeping an eye on the rearview mirror. The sedan didn't follow, but the unease stayed with me all the way home. Back at my apartment, I locked the door behind me and checked it twice, just to be sure. The place felt different somehow, like it wasn't as familiar as it should have been. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was just spooked. I turned on every light in the apartment and collapsed onto the couch, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, hoping for some distraction. But my mind kept circling back to the text, the house, the moving box, everything that didn't make sense. That's when I noticed something odd on the table by the couch. Package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no label or markings. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I hadn't brought anything in with me. Cautiously, I reached out and touched it. The paper felt damp and cold, like it had been sitting outside for hours. My fingers shook as I unwrapped it, revealing a plain black box with a lid. I hesitated. Every part of me screamed not to open it, but my curiosity, or maybe something else, pushed me forward. Inside was a photo. It was an old, grainy picture of a group of people standing in front of a house. At first, I didn't recognize it, but then my stomach twisted. It was that house, the one I'd delivered to earlier. The people in the photo were blurry, their faces indistinct, but something about them felt wrong. They didn't look like they belonged, like they weren't real. Beneath the photo was a folded piece of paper. My hands felt like they were moving on their own as I opened it. "You were warned." I dropped the note, my chest tightening as a chill ran down my spine. My first instinct was to get out of the apartment, but where would I even go? I wasn't sure I'd be any safer outside. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of the fridge felt like a threat. I left the lights on, clutching my phone like a lifeline. When I finally dozed off, it wasn't for long. I woke up just before dawn to a sound that didn't belong. A soft tapping at the window. I froze, my heart racing as I stared at the curtains. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a branch or the wind, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. Gathering what little courage I had, I grabbed a flashlight from the table and approached the window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back. Nothing. The street outside was empty, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlights. No branches, no people, no sign of anything that could have made the sound. But as I turned away, I noticed something on the glass. For faint smudges, like the marks of fingertips. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't my imagination. Someone or something had been there. By the time morning came, I was a mess. My head was pounding, my body tense from a night of interrupted sleep and constant fear. I called out of work, telling them I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't even a lie. I didn't feel like myself at all. I spent the day trying to keep busy, hoping to distract myself from the events of the night. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the memories crept back. The package, the photo, the smudges, it all felt connected, though I didn't know how. And then there was Mark. His warning echoed in my mind. Louder now. They don't like visitors. I decided to text him, even though I wasn't sure he'd respond. "Mark, what did you mean about the house?" The reply came almost immediately. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." By evening, I was more paranoid than ever. Every shadow in my apartment felt alive, every noise a possible threat. I kept checking the locks, looking out the window, waiting for something to happen. When the knock at the door finally came, it wasn't surprising. What scared me was how I'd been expecting it, like I knew it was coming. I approached slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft and cold, coming from the other side of the door. "You shouldn't have gone there." The whispers didn't stop after that night. At first, I thought they were in my head, that maybe stress or exhaustion had finally caught up to me. But then they started coming from places they shouldn't. The corner of my bedroom, the hallway outside my apartment, even the rearview mirror when I was driving. Always the same words, soft and chilling. "You shouldn't have gone there." I didn't know what to do. Calling the police seemed pointless. I didn't even know how to explain what was happening. And who would believe me? So I did what most people would do. I ignored it. I kept my head down, tried to act normal, and told myself it would stop if I just pretended it wasn't real. But it didn't stop. A few days later, I was leaving the warehouse after another long shift. The parking lot was empty, the sky heavy with low clouds that blocked out the moonlight. As I approached my car, I felt it again. That heavy, suffocating sensation, like someone was standing too close. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone behind me. There was no one. I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, but the feeling only got worse. My breath quickened as I scanned the lot, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. It was standing near the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. At first, I thought it was a person, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was wrong. The shape was off, like it didn't quite fit. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath. "Hello!" I called out, my voice shaking. It didn't move. My instincts screamed at me to get in the car and leave, but my legs felt frozen. I couldn't look away, like something was holding me there, forcing me to watch. Then it moved, not like a person would, but with a sudden, jerking motion, as if it had skipped forward in time. One moment it was by the edge of the lot, and the next it was closer, much closer. I stumbled back, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them, the sound echoing through the empty lot. When I looked up, it was gone. I didn't wait to find out where it had gone. Grabbing the keys, I dove into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes darting to every shadow as I sped out of the lot. I barely made it home, my heart pounding the entire drive. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I expected to see something in the back seat. But the car was empty, at least I hoped it was. Once inside my apartment, I locked every door and window, drawing the curtains tight. I turned on all the lights, but even the brightness couldn't chase away the shadows. They seemed darker now, deeper, like they were hiding something. I sat on the couch, trying to calm down, when my phone buzzed. It was another text from the unknown number. "It's too late." I threw the phone onto the table, my chest tightening. My breathing was shallow, my pulse racing. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. Grabbing my jacket, I drove back to the warehouse. I didn't know what I was looking for. Mark, maybe, or some clue to explain what was happening. The place was eerily quiet when I arrived, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I found Mark near the loading dock, sitting on the edge with his head in his hands. He looked worse than before, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said without looking up. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" He let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. None of us do. But once you see it, it doesn't let go." "Why? What does it want?" He finally looked at me, and the hopelessness in his eyes made my stomach twist. "It wants you to understand, and then it wants you gone." Before I could respond, a sound echoed through the warehouse. A low, rumbling growl that didn't belong. Mark shot to his feet, his eyes wide with terror. "It's here." The lights above us flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows across the walls. The air grew colder, biting at my skin as the growling got louder, closer. "Run," Mark hissed, shoving me toward the exit. I stumbled, my legs refusing to move fast enough. Behind us, the growling turned into a guttural roar, and the shadows on the walls began to move, twisting and writhing like they were alive. I glanced back and immediately regretted it. It was there, the figure from the parking lot, its shape even more distorted now, like it was bending reality around it. Its limbs were too long, its movements unnatural, as if it were glitching in and out of existence. Mark grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't look at it. Just go." We ran through the aisles of packages, the sound of its footsteps pounding behind us. It wasn't just following, it was chasing, and it was getting closer. The cold was unbearable now, seeping into my bones. My vision blurred as panic took over, but I kept running, Mark's grip the only thing keeping me moving. We burst through a side door, the night air hitting me like a slap. But the relief was short-lived. The figure was already there, waiting. Mark froze, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and ran back into the warehouse, slamming the door behind him. I was alone. The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out, but there was none. Its head tilted, as if studying me, and for a moment, everything went silent. The world seemed to stop, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Then it spoke, not in words, but in thoughts, an overwhelming flood of images and feelings that filled my mind. Fear, despair, loneliness, and one clear message: you shouldn't have gone there. The world around me blurred as the figure stepped closer, its impossible form twisting the air like heat rising off pavement. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe, the weight of its presence crushing me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Then, just as I thought it was over, something broke the silence. A loud crash echoed from the warehouse behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. The figure hesitated, its head jerking toward the noise. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs felt like lead, my body screaming in protest, but fear kept me moving. I didn't look back, didn't dare to. The sound of its footsteps, heavy, uneven, followed me for what felt like forever. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I flung the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. My fingers fumbled for the ignition, and the engine roared to life just as a shadow fell over the window. I didn't look, couldn't. I slammed the car into gear and tore out of the parking lot, my tires screeching against the pavement. The road ahead was a blur, my mind racing faster than the car. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. When I finally stopped, I was miles from the warehouse, parked on the side of a quiet road surrounded by empty fields. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The car was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. I sat there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to think. The figure's image was burned into my mind, its twisted form and those whispers that still echoed in my ears. You shouldn't have gone there. What did it mean? What had I done to deserve this? The questions circled endlessly, but there were no answers. The next morning, I called in sick again. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, not even Mark. When I tried to text him, the message wouldn't go through. His number was gone like it had never existed. I stayed home all day, keeping the lights on and the curtains drawn. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow felt alive. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was gone. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The following week, I quit my job. I didn't explain why, just told them I needed a change. The manager didn't seem surprised. He gave me a tight-lipped smile and a quick nod, as if he knew something I didn't. I moved a few towns over, hoping a fresh start would help. The first few nights were quiet, and I almost let myself believe that I'd left it all behind. Then, one evening, I noticed something strange. The porch light outside my new apartment flickered, just like the one at that house. I brushed it off as a coincidence, but when I went to bed, I saw them. Smudges on the window, faint but unmistakable. I didn't sleep that night. It's been months now, and I've learned to live with it. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling that I'm never really alone. Whatever it is, it hasn't hurt me, but it hasn't left me either. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. Maybe it's a warning or a punishment or something I'll never understand. All I know is this: that night changed me. I don't look at the world the same way anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, every shadow in the corner of my eye feels alive. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, I hear it again. You shouldn't have gone there. I thought I could forget about that house, about everything that happened. But now, every shadow feels like it's watching me. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.